iWriterly is certainly one of the more popular writing channels in the community. Known for her professionalism and experience with agencies in the publishing world, Meg Latour is not only a writer and a YouTuber. She has shared several podcasts, interviews, and collabs with several different writers of varying degrees of experience within and outside the AuthorTube community. While most of her videos result in more writing advice, her perspective is of keen interest to the writer looking to release their book to traditional publishing. With her editing experience for Tech Magazine and freelance work at Cresiviero Literary Agency, Meg is able to lend insight from the other side. What are agents looking for? What is the key to grabbing their attention? What trends tend to follow success? And with Query Hack, does my writing measure up, and what would I need to do to get there? In November of 2020, Meg finally published a book of her own, the debut novel now infamously known as The Cyborg Tinkerer. Meant as a start of a series called The Curious Case of the Cyborg Circus, the novel went on to do fairly well, receiving praise from others well known in the community like Jenna Moresi, Sasha Black, and Elliot Brooks. Plenty of viewers who supported Meg's channel naturally flocked to buy her book, but it wasn't until the majority of readings started to diminish their earlier perspectives of Meg and her professional skills. Goodreads began to see a number of negative reviews for that book. Online, while there were those who favored The Cyborg Tinkerer, more and more started to hop on the scene to call out just how much they disliked the novel and now cannot seem to watch Meg's videos with the same favor they had as before. That some AuthorTube tea videos began to arise concerning the curious spike of positive reviews on Goodreads that seemingly took her book from a 3.2 to a 3.5 star rating overnight. While many people commented on Meg's latest video inquiring as to whether or not she had hired book reviews bots or it was just friends and family trying to spike the positive rating of that book in an attempt to save her reputation, the comments and eventually the video was removed altogether. The video was re-uploaded, but none of the comments with it, and today you will find it hard-pressed to see anything in the comment section accusing Meg Latour of anything suspicious. Meg released a statement on her Twitter as well as a comment pinned to her own video in an attempt to shut down the so-called hate-mongers who find it hard to believe the Cyborg Tinkerer is worth its weight. Today, it sits at a sickly 2.8 star, which is a far cry from renowned as the so-called well-versed Meg Latour is claimed to be. She recently released a collab with RK Golden Savvy talking a little bit about the experience, while stating part of the reason the series may not go on is because of its predecessor's terrible reputation and the gossip swirling it. After reading The Cyborg Tinkerer myself quite a few times, I can honestly say it's certainly a debut novel. In comparison to traditional writing especially, which many people have associated iWriterly, it would seem the great Meg Latour is also lacking in experience. This goes to prove one of two things. One, writing is not like editing and vice versa. No matter your experience with the publishing world or the marketing world, it can only help you in the logistics. And two, no matter the experience, no matter how painted and polished and professional you might appear on YouTube, it can only do so much to save face when your writing is finally able to speak for itself.
Author branding is you. More specifically, it's how people perceive you. Branding, by definition, is a marketing practice in which a company creates a name, symbol, or design that is easily identifiable as belonging to the company. I think consistency of content is super, super important. So there's lots of ways that you can really set up expectations for your audience.
And I've been on hiatus since March of 2021. I got a divorce. Firm believer of a separation of personal and business. I did go on an unplanned hiatus for about a year and a half, depending on when I post this video, and I do think it only right to share with you all where I have been, why I have been gone.
The whole thing is highly suspect.
Filler words often also encompasses things like adjectives and adverbs, so words that end in ly. A lot of times those words aren't really necessary. If you have wordy writing, maybe you don't struggle with filler words, maybe you just aren't very economical in the way that you write.
You don't know what you're talking about, do you?
Most writers have to write several books before they really get the hang of things.
At this point in time, I haven't felt the desire to write, and I don't want to force it. So I have decided what is bringing me joy is creating other types of content in the meantime, like launching this new podcast, doing these author interviews. I don't have plans to write one at this point because I'm not writing anything, but I appreciate your interest.
Oh, Oh, thank God.
Shorten your learning curve and write better books more quickly. Acknowledge that you don't know everything and that your writing isn't perfect.
She self-published her debut novel, The Cyborg Tinkerer. Apparently, it didn't do too well. It had a pretty low rating. People saw that her book went from a 3.1 star to like a 3.5 overnight. And the only reason for this giant increase in ratings is that she bought fake reviews. I was watching Meglator's last video and everyone in the comments were like, why are you buying fake reviews? Commented back in one of the threads, like, what? How do you know this is true? Like, how do you have proof? She actually had deleted this video for a bit, like 3 days or something. It's currently back up on YouTube, but the comments, like my comments, are all deleted. Responding to accusations about fake Goodreads review. I've been recently made aware that a lot of 5-star reviews have been posted on Goodreads recently for the Cyborg Tinkerer. As I've stated in my videos, I don't go on Goodreads for my mental health.
Number 2, research how to write a good book. Some topics you might want to research and learn more about include plot structure, character arcs, how to give a character unique voice, pacing.
It's ironic.
Now, there is no right or wrong way to go about writing. However, a pantser has a lot more work to do in the editing phase because they don't plan out their work in advance. Therefore, consider checking things out like beat sheets or researching the plot and structure of a novel before you write your novel. Save the Cat Writes a Novel, for example, has a lot of beat sheets, and that is a popular resource here on AuthorTube. Definitely consider checking that out.
I hate that cliche.
Number 4, work with critique partners and beta readers. Without outside feedback on our stories, we cannot improve our writing.
The top 10 ways to deal with haters. Now, anytime you put yourself out there, whether you are publishing a book, you are on YouTube as an author-tuber, a booktuber, you may get some feedback or criticism that doesn't sound so nice, or maybe could have been phrased a little differently, or possibly just not said at all. So today, I'm doing a collab with Meglator from iWriterly, who is amazing and awesome. But we've split up this list so that I'm going to give you my top 5 tactics for dealing with haters, and then you're going to switch over to Meg's channel and watch her top 5.
Do authors owe books to readers? And if an author starts a series, are they obligated to finish that series?
There's lots of ways that you can really set up expectations for your audience.
I think another one that might be a personal thing is like some type of trauma that might take away from the joy of writing. I had written a few examples out, but like maybe the book got tied up in a legal battle for some reason. Maybe they were
Harassed online by readers.
or they are no longer interested in writing in that genre. Maybe if it's like, you know, a series that they're currently working on.
Where is it? Where the is it? I swear to God. You laughing, girl? You trying to laugh? This funny?
So much can change, and readers just aren't always privy to that information. So to some extent, you do have to be patient with authors because they are people too. But at the same time, it's okay to feel your feelings and be disappointed about it.
I'm feeling much better now.
Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've waited for.
I wouldn't even put the other genres of this book that's listed as subcategories because they're so far removed from what we've been accustomed to as these different genres. Sci-fi being the most removed, so much so that it's practically a joke. But I think that does go to show how a lot of writers just see genres and subcategories as nothing more than a mood or a setting for their novel. They're used a lot more these days as describing factor to help a reader feel like what the novel is going to feel like, what kind of setting it is, and not actually what the story is about. While I only have so much time to delve into what makes a genre, what makes a subgenre, eventually I want to get into it, but I don't have the time today. However, I do want to point out a few things. Genres have a sort of relatable writing style that qualify them to fit in with others of their kind. People who might be accustomed to reading steampunk, for example, might not find much of steampunk in the Cyborg Tinkerer aside from wardrobe. The cyborg parts themselves don't even really get used. But the steampunk novels themselves aren't just sci-fi novels setting a certain atmosphere. Not that I don't think that the cyborgs would fit perfectly in with a steampunk setting. I mean, I do think that the two could go hand in hand. But I think that cyborgs would more so be a contributing factor to the steampunk category rather than the other way around. Genre categories like steampunk shouldn't be mere contributors to your story, just because the outfits are kind of cool. It feels like the only reason that it was listed as steampunk was to kind of describe the vibe that was there. And I think that's backwards. Genres don't exist to help you define what your story is. Your story defines itself, and then that determines what genre or category that it would fall into. So many writers these days, I feel like, are putting their stories in with the wrong genres because they have a certain idea of what it actually is, and then readers of those genres have these certain expectations, so they go in and read that novel and they're either disappointed, they're confused, it just doesn't fit whatsoever. Not only are you disappointing the readers that already have those expectations, but your book might have done much better in a different category if you wanted to admit that it would have fit better in a different category. Personally, I think the Cyborg Tinkerer would have fit well in a romance, maybe smut or erotica, or as an adventure story. And I think that could have helped it thrive if it had a few more drafts, because obviously the writing is also a problem, but we'll get into that in a minute. The biggest part about defining the genre, though, is when you have all of these different categories, it feels like you're trying to reach all of these different audiences and collectively grab all of these readers from different categories because it has all these qualities that all these readers might be looking for in a book, in an attempt to make that bigger splash and have a larger outreach. But in the end, you're actually hurting your novel because it doesn't really fit into any of these categories. It doesn't fit into any genre, and every reader only gets maybe a taste of what they actually came for. One of the biggest problems with this is author tubers who insist and have to insist that their books are adult fiction because so many readers are confusing it and believing that it is made for young adults. That's because it's written like it's made for young adults. And I feel like the addition of profanity, the over-sexuality, the smut, the gore, all of these factors are almost forced into a story, so much so that it just feels like it really doesn't belong unless it's a parody or a smut novel, just because they need to try to convince their audiences that it's mature enough to stand out from young adult fiction. And that's just not how it works. You have to incorporate all of these characteristics to try to convince your readers that they're reading something that otherwise they wouldn't know that they're reading. You're not doing it right. People will put it in that other category because of the expectations that they've had and that have been met by other books in that category. Your book will associate with that category, and that's why it's being listed as that, because it literally has all of the same characteristics and meets all of the expectations of a different type of reader. The reason we put books in genres and categories to begin with is to help readers find something that they're looking for. If they're looking for sci-fi, if they're looking for a parody, if they're looking for drama or romance or smut. One of the biggest problems that I think that we're having right now is we have so many smut novels that are being incorporated in YA and adult fiction. They're being thrown in with all these different labels like spicy, like dark, to try to convince the readers that it's more mature than it really is, but also because they're trying to grab readers from a different audience to widen their outreach, because the market has already been saturated in that specific genre. It is so difficult to stand out. And I don't think it's right. I think we need to have a serious discussion on what actually makes a genre, what determines what book should fall into a category, and whether or not the writer even knows whether or not their own book would fall into the category that they want to list it as. But we will save that discussion for a different time. As for the sci-fi portion of this book, I really don't think it was researched enough to be considered sci-fi. Now, sure, you can have sci-fi elements like Star Wars or like Firefly. It doesn't have to be overly researched. There's definitely a sort of fantasy aspect in here, but this book doesn't really feel like sci-fi or fantasy unless you're counting the romantic fantasies of the characters, but I mean, does that even really count? And again, we are not even going to talk about the space opera side of it because I could not imagine. It's a romance. Actually, no. I don't even think there's a romantic moment in this novel. It would be considered smut. The reason that I think it's a romance is because the entire plot literally revolves around whether or not these characters even get together. No matter what else is going on in the book, it almost seems like it's put on the back burner. It's secondary to the drama that is happening between all three of the characters. The misunderstandings, the made-up conflicts, the drama, the so-called betrayals, all of it takes the focal point of the story. It all takes the spotlight. It is literally the only thing that even matters in this book. And sometimes it feels like it's this weird race, almost like the plot of the story has to race to catch up to the drama and the romance that's happening with all of these characters. The romance will always take the lead. There are times where it feels like the characters' emotions are what's really running the show.
You can't force a dream onto someone else!
Yes, I can! I can force a dream on you!
Why are you yelling?
Because it's a good dream! And it's got cool animals in it and some pretty great people, too!
Like when we have Rora accusing Gwen of betraying her when she's only known Gwen for maybe half a day. When Gwen decides to try to run away from the circus because she thinks that she is just harming them, so she goes off to try to run away and she ends up with on the docks with these, I forget what term exactly they're called, but they're basically human traffickers. And then Bastion comes on to save her and they have this big heart-to-heart and it's all this emotions. It's very emotionally driven.
Why are you so dramatic?
It really feels like a lot of that throughout the story, so much so that I think that's really what hinders the plot from making any sense, is because it feels like the plot literally has to wrap around the relationship of these characters. If there's something going on with these characters, the plot has to find a way to either patch it up or utilize it so that these characters end up getting back together. But it's definitely tugging more on the relationship aspect of the story. Normally, in a sci-fi, steampunk, whatever you want to call this novel, the romance would be like the secondary plot and would be considered the subplot. It's not a smut novel. It would take second place. And then that subplot will kind of tie into the main plot, but the main plot would still be overhead. The main plot is what's driving these characters, and then these characters are going to be struggling with their internal conflicts. There are going to be things within the main plot that affect the relationship and the internal conflict with these characters. With this book, it's the other way around. The relationship is the overarching plot. The main plot is literally trying to tie up the loose ends and fix what it can so that the relationship can continue to move forward. I think the scene that really stuck up to me was when, ironically enough, Rora accused Gwen of betraying her, even though she didn't know her for like half a day. It was after like the second test. Her and Gwen have kind of sort of resolved, but they also kind of sort of had an argument. Gwen wants to cheat and destroy their main antagonists' props in order for them to gain an advantage. And Rora, in her pride, is like, no, I can win this. I got this. Which I respected until she storms off, and then the main antagonist, Abercan, confronts her, and she spills her guts out with Gwen's plan and everything. And it's like, not only is this guy somebody that you absolutely detest, you have every right to detest way more than Gwen ever could, but you just accused Gwen and caused all of this melodrama because she betrayed you after knowing you for half a day, and then you in your pride insist that this is not the way to go about, and you literally just spill your guts out to the enemy. You get yourself hurt, you risk getting your friends, Gwen, Bastion, everyone else hurt, just because you want to keep your robot hand. And then he ends up hurting you anyway, so there was no point to that. She goes back and she tells Gwen, she tells all of them, I spilled my guts out, so this is not going to work. And then Gwen goes to do it anyway. It's like the plot is just, it's down here and it needs to be up here. But the relationship and the drama between the characters is what's actually up here, because then Gwen goes to mess with the props and she is caught naturally. Abercan is not going to let her pass. He knows that she's coming and she's just like, oh, well, I'm not surprised, but I had to try anyway kind of attitude. And it's like, are you an idiot?
Stupid.
Celeste also appears and threatens to knock out both of Gwen's legs and cause her to be crippled, and then Bastion stands up for Gwen because he just can't stand to see Gwen hurt. The significance of it is just not there. The plot, the things, the actions that these characters do make no sense whatsoever. They contribute nothing to the plot. It is literally meant to contribute to the drama and the relationship between these characters. Now we're going to get a little bit into the over-sexualized side of the book, because as much as I want to claim that this book is a romance because there's not nearly enough sex in it, one would deem it a smut novel, I would have to insist that it is still a smut novel, because it's not even really about the romance. Nothing really romantic happens in this book. It's not about love, and if this is your idea of love, you need to get your brain cells checked. It is literally a book about the characters getting laid. That's the whole point of the novel. And you could say, well, it's actually just about the cyborg circus and they're trying to stand up for themselves and Gwen is trying to save them, Gwen is trying to help them, but there's no real fight until the third act, and that fight is a result of more drama. The writing itself is unlike anything I have ever read before. Was this book even edited? Well, there go my plans. If I had to describe the writing in this book in one word, it would not be spicy. It would be raunchy, which is not always a bad thing. It's actually not the raunchiness of it that bothers me. And I get that Gwen came off a pirate ship and she's bound to be a tomboy and she's bound to have all these experiences that everyone else is kind of oblivious to. She comes from a harder background, supposedly. So it kind of makes sense that this would fit her character, but a lot of times throughout the novel, it just feels so forced. But this book has a thing where it's trying too hard to convince the reader that she is that, by having the character come off as forceful instead of natural. And as for the sexual talk, it's a lot. Like when we're teased with Gwen's dream about Rora, to the two circus performers that she kind of walks in on giving, can I say oral? The bashfulness from Bastion when Gwen is just on full display through her shirt. The beginning of the novel with the mechanic, and then the threesome at the end. Like, I'm trying to understand the significance of it, and this is accommodated by the less than tasteful verbiage used to describe every character in here as a hypersexual. That's every character's main goal here. Everyone's dying. Their cyborg parts might be removed, but they want to enjoy their end times instead of fighting. They would rather fuck. They just all give up. And I think that's another thing that kind of cracks me up in here is none of the other characters seem to care about what's happening. All of them seem to make it feel like they're all outnumbered. They can't get together. Which, tying into the theme of family we're also going to get into today, doesn't make any sense. You want to set these cyborgs as something that are precious because they stick together, because even though everyone on the outside is against them, they're there for each other. All throughout the novel, it's proved to be the exact opposite, even with our main characters. Instead of fighting for their lives, instead of running away, instead of literally trying to do anything to solve, fix, or escape the situation, they all just seem to accept their fate for one final fuck. The crass language in here would make more sense if it were advertised as a smut novel. It just felt like it was trying too hard to stand out to be something that it was not. And I can only assume this was an attempt to break through the over-sexualized writing of male writers who constantly talk about women in this way. But it's like fighting fire with fire. You're not really doing much to help the situation. And proving that you are just as capable to do the same exact thing is really not proving anything. We know that there are female writers who can write dirty just as well as male writers who can write dirty. It's not a contest. Or it shouldn't be, at least, not in that aspect. Then there are these weird contradictions where Rora, especially being someone of pride and being someone who takes a lot of pride in what she does, so much so that she cut off her own hand to replace with a cyborg hand so she could continue to do what she loves. Instead of, I don't know, fighting with her family that she can still do it just with the cyborg part and then, I don't know, maybe she gets rejected. She just automatically opts to run away with the circus because her family treated her as an object, as a prize, as something to gain an advantage of, sort of like a trophy, and as soon as she proved that she couldn't do that her way anymore, they decided to do it another way by selling her off to this lord or marrying her off to this noble or lord or something, probably so the family could keep their connections, but there's really not much context here. And then she just refused to marry him because she didn't want to be the bearer of his seed. The way that she worded it was like really off. This might be a nitpicky thing, but the belly is not where the baby grows. That's something where it ends up if you're using other orifices more so suited for pleasure. One minute the characters are hatching a plan, the next they're talking about boobs and butts and other stuff that just doesn't fit in with anything going on. Biggest qualm that I had with the writing was the pacing. There really is loads of information about this world in the story, but I reread it so many times because its details are all just kind of slipped in passages and random bits of information where they don't really belong. And then it seems to monologue for a little bit and go off a little bit, but that monologuing kind of raises more questions, and you're just like, okay, well, we're delving into the world building. And normally in a novel, when it starts to do this, you don't get this big info dump on the world. You just get like a small piece of it. That's what's natural. You just get a small piece of it and then you leave it at that. And then a little ways down, you get another small piece of it, and you get another small piece of it. And you kind of incorporate it in the actions and what's actually happening with the story, so it's still moving the story along while you're getting this information. That's balanced pacing, and it is not an easy thing to achieve. A lot of writers I see just don't execute it very well, don't know how to execute it, and I completely understand. It's probably my biggest struggle. But with this novel, it's almost like you have those passages that are just random bits of information that we don't need, followed by more random bits of information that we don't need. That information tends to raise up questions that you would naturally as a reader have because you're delving into this topic, but it cuts off. Like, that information cuts off immediately, and it starts with more random information about something that you weren't even really talking about. So you don't really get an understanding of how the world works. And then the answers to those questions are slipped into more slivers of information randomly, like 5 chapters down, when you weren't even really talking about it. So we're not really grounded in this world. We're not really allowed to grasp what exactly is going on and how this world is functioning. Especially with the last video, when I was going through it, I was just like, okay, I missed that. And I read this thing 5 times. And I'm just like, how have I read this book so many times and I still don't understand what's going on? The information that I need is placed in random spots where it really doesn't belong. It disrupts the pacing, it disrupts the flow of the story, and you end up having to read entire passages over and over and over again to try to grasp that understanding. But you cannot grasp it because the other half of that equation is like 5 chapters down. So a lot of the book I was left kind of dissociating so much because I couldn't grab hold of anything. Consistently changing the subject so you don't even know what you're really talking about anymore. You need to stay on a subject just long enough for the reader to be able to grasp the message that you're trying to give them. If you have to disrupt the story to relay information, you don't want it to be an info dump, but they still need that information, and monologue is still a valid way to carry that information. I'm not completely against it, but you need to keep it brief. You need to make it so that the story is consistently moving with it. There has to be a reason that it was brought up, and then you need to give that message clearly. There has to be a purpose for breaking the story like that. It can't just be random. Writing itself is full of valleys and peaks. And those valleys aren't just there for the MC to feel sorry for themselves before the big climactic ending. They're also there to relay important information and to help get your readers grounded in the world that you are creating. It doesn't have to be a slow book for this to happen. Constantly switching topics because you're worried about losing the reader's attention is going to give more peaks, and it's going to make the story feel disjointed. I just felt like I was dissociating a lot through this book because most of the information that was being relayed was unimportant or poorly timed. It's filler, and it's really not worth torturing your reader for 400 page count. I'm not really a big fan of the back and forth POVs either, but a lot of people seem to like it. It's just a preference thing. However, that doesn't mean that I don't understand what makes it work versus what makes it fail. I'd say this book was on the right track as far as keeping those energy levels the same, because you don't want to have one character be way up here and then suddenly drop it with the other POV being way down here. You kind of have to keep it at a medium and then kind of lower it back down. But you also want either lower this back down or keep it up here to consistently raise the bar for the other POV. But the pacing is honestly what ruined it for me. It just felt so off that every time we were switching POVs, the energy levels were almost too identical, and I don't think that that's really a good flow either. It was like the one was up here, the other one also had to be up here. One was down here, one had to be down here. And I really think the second and first POVs, if you're switching characters, really need to kind of fluctuate, and that's also going to kind of help the energy levels. It's going to help the pacing of your story, but because we were both up here, it felt too disjointed. It just added to the trouble with the pacing that was already in this book to begin with. Not to mention, I don't really see the significance of switching POVs. Gwen and Rora kind of are important because you do have two sides of the story being given by two characters who are experiencing different sides of the story. But since the majority of the story wasn't really important anyway, and the plot wasn't really important anyway, there really wasn't any purpose. If the story came first, that would make more sense, but because we had so many misunderstandings and so many miscommunications, and because it was all about the drama, I don't think it worked. And then also we're kind of working with extremes, right? Like if we're at a peak, it's at like the most extreme peak that we can find. There's always something extreme that's happening, like the Celeste working on Bastion or the cyborg parts being removed without anesthetic. Like it has to be cranked to the max. And then when we're brought to the lows, it's all about really uncomfortable situations and really inappropriate discussions that I feel like the characters should not have been having anyways. I mean, Gwen and Rora were spilling their guts out with their tragic backstories on the first date after Gwen had already ditched Rora to go dance with Bastion, proving that Rora is not really that important to her anyways, and they still spill their guts out to each other. And then Rora automatically accusing her of betraying because she spilled her guts out, and it's like, you've known this person for half a day. So we're constantly working with these extremes, and it's also working with those energy levels that are just not fluctuating properly, and the pacing that is already off. So you have three major problems with the writing structure in the story, and I really think that's why I kept getting lost. I want to say it's not just the world building. I really think the pacing was a big part of it and was a big reason why I felt like I was over too much hyper sensualization. Is that a word? Couldn't get a break, basically. There wasn't really any middle part. It was just an extreme. And it made me feel like I couldn't really sit with this information because we're constantly moving on to the next big thing. And we're just jumping into it. As for Bastion, I think he's really the only character I could sympathize with in this book. Gwen's harshness when approaching him with his eating disorder and the abuse from Celeste is unfathomable. I could sum up the intensity with which I despise the main character just in this chapter alone. Not that she was set up to be likable from the first. Now she just looks like a scumbag. She pushes him to open up. She mocks him in order to manipulate him to get him to open up because he doesn't want to talk about these serious issues like Rora did right off the bat. And then she's going to act like she's all protective over him, like she actually cares. This is not sympathy. This is control. In real life, people who do this shit are only trying to get something from you. Or they feel like a savior for taking on your emotional burden, which is what I'm betting Gwen was doing in this moment. If you are looking to make characters that people can understand, relate to, empathize with, you need to start learning about basic human psychology. Please. It will save you so much heartache from critics, reviewers, editors. But if you want to write about people, you need to learn about people. They don't all fit in one category. It would also benefit to learn the difference between archetypes and stereotypes, and that your characters should never be just stuck in one category. It would be a tragic error. These tools are used to start writing, to start understanding your characters. They shouldn't make up your character. I see this happen a lot, especially with AuthorTube books. Characters fall in line with a specific category and they just stay there. They're the hero, the martyr, the villain. It's a good way to lose a lot of points. They can still fit in one of these categories, but you don't just slap a label on them and then forget about it. There has to be a reason. The hero who starts out a hero has to have a reason for wanting to continue being a hero. Or the person who is not a hero but wants to be a hero needs a reason to want to be a hero. They need something to fight for. The villain, similarly, is also someone with something to fight for. It's not just, well, the bad guy wants to do bad things, so that makes him the bad guy. Or even using like control, he just wants control, I feel like is kind of a cop-out. You want to give your characters arcs, flaws, and personalities. But I will say that you can also plan out too much. Some of this stuff is something that you kind of just find in the novel, because if you plot it out to death and to a T, it's going to feel calculated as all hell. This is in the details, I might add, and I feel like these details often kind of get glossed over or skipped because they're just not important enough to add in. But I do feel like after a while it starts to feel robotic. I can't really say that any of the characters in here really do much of anything aside from just be a part of the circus because they're cyborgs, and that's about the extent of their personality traits. Well, that and they want to fuck other people, but that's the extent of their personality traits. Plus, they were all filthy rich at one point. I cannot forget that detail. I did find it kind of comical how Bastion kind of viewed Rora and labeled her as like ruthless, or you would have to be ruthless to cut off your hand. He has this kind of grim fascination with her, but then they don't really do anything with it either. It's literally just talking up the character and making her out to be something that clearly she is not, if she's willing to spill her guts out to Abraham 5 minutes after talking about how she's too proud to cheat. And then because she feels bad about betraying them, she just kind of goes along with it and hopes they can get away with it. It's not really giving ruthless so much as desperate. But it also feels like it's this admirable quality to want to be a cyborg just to continue doing what you want to do. And I feel like that could have tied into one of the themes. It just fell flat. Nothing really happens with it. There's nothing. And I think that this would have fit Rora's personality more effectively if the emphasis for his respect for her was placed more so on her motive rather than on her tragedy. Because we're so focused on what happened to her, like that automatically makes her a good person. I don't know if you're aware of this, but bad things happen to bad people too. It doesn't really state much for your character just because they came from tragic circumstances. It doesn't make them a good person. Rora came from a wealthy family of lords and nobles, whatnot, people in power, like the rest of them.
Panem today, Panem tomorrow, Panem forever.
She was a great acrobat or gymnast. I have to look it up again. She injured her wrist and she was told that she wouldn't be able to perform again. And I do think that I'm going to get more into themes in a minute, but I want to talk about this before I forget about it again. The theme as far as like we are more than our parts. I feel like Rora really could have fit in a little bit better because she cut off her hand specifically to be able to continue doing what she loves. Could have drove the point home. They still are retaining their humanity. Just because they lose a part of themselves, they can also gain a part of themselves back. And that doesn't make them one thing or another, or it shouldn't. And it shouldn't be seen as labeling them as one thing or another because the motive is still there. She's still doing what she loves. That's what's important to her. That is what took priority in her life. That is her character. That is who she is. And I feel like that really could have been used throughout the novel, especially if she was using that hand for something. But it's dropped and we don't really get any more information on it. She doesn't really use it much for anything. I mean, anyone can use a hand, I get it, but it's not really utilized at all. It's just meant to describe that she's a ruthless person because she cut off her hand to get a cyborg part. But again, it's kind of this hypocritical, because she got the cyborg part, she is now ruthless. And it's just like, well, you're completely missing the point. You're completely forgetting why she did that. The why is what matters here. The why is what makes her that type of person. It doesn't mean that she's necessarily ruthless. It means that she is a go-getter. It means that she will get what she wants and she's going to fight for what she wants. But then she doesn't even really fight for what she wants when she's spilling her guts out to Abraham and she's talking about her pride. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a scary circumstance to be in, but at the same time, you can't boast that you're proud and you're too proud to cheat and you're going to do the right thing and then just completely betray everyone. It's a huge contradiction that I have a problem with. Any of the likability that could have been attributed to her and I feel like was trying to be associated with her is completely stripped by this contradiction. I think Bastion is the only one that didn't piss me off, but again, we don't really know much about him. He's not really fighting for something so much as fighting against something because it's right, because it's the right thing to do. We know your background. We know that you left your family and all those circumstances because you didn't agree with it, but we never really got the why. But it doesn't really explain why Bastion decided to leave, especially after his family kind of brought him up in this and kind of tried incorporating him into the business. Why was it him that decided to leave? Like, what happened? And we could get more of that in the sequel if there was going to be one, but I don't think that's going to happen. So throughout the book, again, since we don't have all of that background, it would be more context that would need to be filled. Like, why is Bastian doing this? And then he just kind of turns into this wimp that goes along with Celeste for whatever reason. It's not really utilized. All of the things that were given to these characters to be made out to be character traits and made to be backgrounds, it's like the backgrounds were meant to be the thing that made up the character, and I hate to break it to you, that is merely a background. It's merely an introduction of you explaining this is who your character is. This is what their past is. You need to use the story to prove it. You need to use the story to show the reader why they are that person, why they made those choices, and who they really are. Gwen is probably the one with the most background in here, and again, I feel like it's just completely fluffed off, or, well, this is an excuse for her to be crass, hypersexual, and a tomboy, and she hates men. And we follow this thin plot where the characters are making all of these choices, they're making all of these decisions, but it's only tied into their own benefit. The characters really only see each other as tools, and the only characters that matter are the characters that are associated with the main characters in this novel that are not Abercan. They use each other consistently to get what they want, and they don't really care about the other person so much as caring about getting that person to open up to them, to make them feel good. But we're supposed to believe that your characters are the good guys. I was rooting for Abercan in this one. I really hoped that he would have had kind of a turnaround. With Celeste kind of setting him up and kind of helping him along throughout the contest, it's made very clear he's a cheater and he doesn't really care about anything going on with anyone else. Selfish, he's egotistical. I think Abercan could have had a very, very good turnaround at the end of the book. I feel like he could have had this revelation that Celeste really does only see him as a cyborg and does only really want to use him for his parts. She used him because she thought that she could brainwash him like she did Bastian and get ahead. Like, we really could have seen that and kind of had Abercan really have this turnaround, and that we are more than our parts theme would have tied into the we are family theme if Abercan had then decided to help Gwen and her party because he realized that Celeste just saw him as an object, and that's not really what he wants to be about. Forget the fact that he's a male. Just give your character something to actually care about. Like, give him a heart, for crying out loud. Just because he's a bad guy doesn't mean he's a bad guy. We're going to talk a little bit about Gwen too and about her background. Gwen comes from a family who I believe was working like the lumber industry, and since it sounds like her dad was kind of the head of the lumber industry, it sounds like it was a pretty big industry. Anyway, her dad didn't like what the emperor was doing. We'll talk about the union laws and prohibition and all this shit in the world building section because the politics are insane in this novel. Bear with me. We're talking about her father defying the emperor because he doesn't like what he's doing as far as the laws are concerned, as far as what's going on with the cyborgs. The emperor then decides to send a message to kill all of the servants that worked for Gwen and her family, the lumber industry. First of all, this doesn't make any sense. I will touch a little bit on the world building here, I guess. Literally killing off the people that help the industry, that support your economy. How does that make any sense? We're told that he's stripped of the titles, but does that mean that he's stripped of the power? Does that mean that he's being replaced? Because it doesn't really sound like he's being replaced. But you still need that industry to have your economy thrive. Also, why kill off the servants, like the household servants, to send a message? And it's made to feel like Gwen witnessed this and the streets ran red with blood. Were the servants cyborgs? Like, what did they do to you? Also, how does that type of message really affect anything? I mean, maybe if Gwen's family had more of a regard for the servants and for the workers, or they favored them in some sort of way, it would make a little bit of sense. But I feel like not only is it a waste of resources, it's a waste of showing your power, but now you've just pissed off this really important side of provision for your economy, and you're expecting them to just go along with it because they're afraid. It's kind of like this illusion where the Emperor is the all-powerful, and it's making it out to be like he's the only powerful. And I think this is what gets a lot of people confused when we're talking about politics and we're talking about world building. The Emperor is not the only one in power. He might be the head honcho. He might be the one in charge of all the guards and security military, but there has to be a reason for why his power is more powerful than these other areas. And you have to also realize that these other areas are still major contributing factors. A huge misunderstanding in how things function, and it's made out to be this tragedy for Gwen. In my opinion, workers should have been cyborgs. Workers should have come in to be like, hey, you need to get rid of your cyborgs. This would also give reason for why Gwen's dad opposed the laws. It has to be more than just, well, he's a better person than the Emperor. Gwen's father is not going to risk telling the Emperor no. I mean, maybe in politics, if we're talking about a council member or a senate, but we're not really talking about that. It's just, well, he disagreed with me, so now I'm going to kill off his servants. Go to either confiscate the workers, buybacks, we'll get into that in a minute. His laws and his decisions are going to have a major impact on Gwen's father's industry and how things function. And this, in turn, would give him more of a stance, more of a reason to oppose it, because it's also getting personal. And then even if you wanted to kill off the servants, the Emperor could have been like, well, if you want to make it personal, I will make it personal. So even if they're friends, they're going to turn a blind eye. This in turn would have gave Gwen a very valuable lesson and would have helped kind of create her character, especially when it comes to her not trusting other people. Because even when you're all set up and you make all of these friends and you have all of these connections and you have everything, it only takes one person to take all of that away. This would also give the characters flaws for the story, and it's made very clear in the Cyborg Tinkerer that the characters are not meant to have flaws, which is a huge flaw in itself. Your characters need to have things that they need to work on, otherwise the story is just going to be boring. Obviously in this book it meant Gwen to have those trust issues anyway to be able to work on, and it did try to use the background as a reason, but it doesn't give the why. And that's what's going to give the real heft and kind of help you understand where the character is coming from. Because now she just sounds like she's just complaining about her past. She's complaining about bad things happening and why she hates this person because they did bad things to her. But she's not really driven. She's not really hindered in any real way. And it makes her come off as kind of obnoxious. Makes her come off as arrogant. Arrogance can also be a flaw, but it's not seen as a flaw. It's seen as a personality trait. Bastion's internal conflict with trust could have kind of tied in with Gwen. And honestly, I think this would have been a better bonding moment than forcing him to confess that he has an eating disorder. I think both of them having trust issues because of where they come from and the fact that they realized early on they couldn't really depend on their family, so they had to learn to fight for themselves, stand on their own 2 feet, so to speak. I think this could have been what actually brought them together, and they could kind of work on that internal conflict and those flaws that they have with each other. And this really would have solidified that piece in the relationship. As far as Rora's concerned, Rora would probably be the one testing both their patients, testing their trust issues. And it doesn't really feel like Gwen has those trust issues when, as soon as Rora opens up about her past, Gwen is also spilling her guts out. So it just, we're kind of made to feel like Gwen is supposed to be guarded, but we're not really shown that she is. And I think that's kind of what would have built the relationship between these 3 characters. And then it would also tie into the things that they would be fighting in the second novel. I think I discussed in the first video why I found Gwen's immediate tinkering abilities kind of a problem, and I'll just touch lightly on that because I already kind of got into it, and how ridiculous it is that she's a ship tinkerer, and it's very, very clear that even in this world and even in this book, a ship tinkerer is definitely not the same thing as a cyborg tinkerer. So I don't understand how she gets away with it for as long as she does. I don't understand how she's not pissing Celeste off because she's not doing it right, because Celeste needs those parts. It just doesn't make any sense. And then her reputation is kind of brought up at the end, like she's this renowned tinkerer that even the Emperor has heard of, and even though he's against cyborgs, he would love to incorporate her in his army. But why? If he was able to see beforehand some of the work that she did, or like I said, like if she had been renowned before she was a ship tinkerer for something else and he wanted to use her, but now she's a cyborg, that would kind of be a good contradiction, I guess, even for him, because that would be his flaw, is being like, well, if it benefits me, it's okay. And I think even if he had seen Gwen's work up front, if she was a ship tinkerer he hadn't heard of, but her work had affected him, or it was something that he wanted. But honestly, I think that sentence and that whole part could have just been stripped, because she's not good at what she does. She's just starting out. She was a ship tinkerer before, and it doesn't sound like it's anything to really brag about, even if you are good at it. I want to talk about like the waste in resources and kind of about Celeste, because even Celeste has a sad background, right? Her kids were killed, even though she was a scientist that created the cyborgs, and she kind of forwarded this. Her kids were killed as a lesson because the Emperor didn't like what she did. So now she's after all of this for revenge. She hates his guts. She wants him dead. She wants everything to go back to normal, kind of, sort of. But it doesn't really make sense that Celeste is melting everything down instead of using resources that she could have, I don't know, gotten from Anchorage to build her army, to work on her army. She's just going to take all of these parts that, let's face it, is not going to be enough to build a cyborg army. You only have, what, 30-some performers? 50-some, maybe? It's not going to be enough. It's literally odds and ends at this point. And then you're talking about kind of just either jamming those parts together or melting them down and from scratch and putting together this monstrosity that's going to be your cyborg army. Doesn't make any real sense. It feels like a waste of resources, especially when you have Gwen, who doesn't know what she's doing, taking these parts off because she doesn't know what she's doing, risking destroying that part altogether so it's inoperable. Not to mention the different styles, classes, upgrades, the different materials that you have to work with cyborgs that have newer upgrades, cyborgs that have older upgrades. Celeste ignored all of the materials and resources from all of the other planets to try to scrounge up the scraps that she had within her circus, instead of, I don't know, using those microchips to just try to control the people that are in her circus, so she at least has a few more super soldiers on her side. The side characters in this are nothing more than props. They are solely there to incite drama and kind of push the main characters forward into believing that they are meant to be. It's ironic that Abrakan is set up to be the bad guy and just a dick, because not only is he an asshole, but it's made to sound out like he's a cheat, even though I don't remember a single instance where he actually cheated in this novel. And then you use that to excuse Gwen, who's supposed to be the heroine, of cheating, because it's just what they have to do. And not only that, but she fails remarkably at it and risks everyone else's lives and everyone else's involved. Why do they even get a chance to go in the competition is what I want to know. Is because in the competition you're not supposed to have teams, you're not supposed to have help. Bastion was already going up against it. Why did Celeste spare any of them? Why wouldn't they automatically be out? She can't have a use for them now because she knows that they're all a team. She knows that they're all working against her. So why not just take them out of the competition altogether? Moving on, I'm an hour and a half in and I'm only halfway through this video. Themes! We're going to take a deep dive into the layers of the story. Normally, novels will have one or two that's kind of threaded all throughout the story, and it essentially is what relates the subplots to the main plot of that story, and kind of the reason the characters are involved in the first place. It's meant to be subtle. Subtle. This is that reading between the lines that readers hear about. This is the true message. Sometimes the theme can be interchangeable, which means what it means for one person might mean something else for another, and it all depends on perspective. This one, there are like 5 themes in this book. And for those of you who are already wondering, no, it is not balanced. They're introduced when the writer is starting to feel inspired, and then they're just kind of forgotten about for the rest of the novel. So let's talk about them. The family theme. So, okay, this one is going to be closer to that main theme and a lot of people and what they think that it's really about. Most of the subplots, most of everything that is already happening in this book can kind of tie into that theme. So this is what the book is about, right? Well, we already know that the setup for it was just wrong. Gwen's view on family is that they're basically disposable. Even when you're dying, you don't really have any inclination to see or talk to them or send a message, do anything for them to let them know that you love them. I don't know, some goopy shit like that. So it is only too ironic when Gwen tries to convince Celeste that the cyborg circus is essentially her family, even though she doesn't have her kids anymore. Very ironic. I do want to say that the setup for your characters, it's absolutely what's going to affect that payoff. Gwen has shown that she doesn't care about her family. She talks about them for sure. She might even feel bad or sad for them, but she doesn't exactly go out of her way to let them know that she still loves them or that she cares about them in any way, even up until her dying days. Which is a shame, because she really would have been the perfect advocate for this type of fight. Aurora had a family who abused her because of an abusive background, and Bastion's family just used him until he realized that he didn't want to be used anymore, so he ran away. Gwen is the only one who had a family that she actually cared about and felt like was there for her, and she kind of holds in this sort of respectful light, even though they are in the background. So she really would have been the only one to be able to approach Celeste. However, setting her up to be the kind of person that doesn't really hold a family in any sort of important life or any sort of significance as far as going out of your way for them kind of ruins the moment. Cyborg theme, layer 2. We are more than our parts. I want to say that the whole point of this contest is to show skill. It is stated at the beginning of the contest. That's what they're there for. Celeste wants to see what they got, to see if she still has a use for them. As I said before, Aurora's story really would have come through and come forward for this theme. Because everyone kind of sees everyone as a tool in here already. Again, it really doesn't work. She is overly romanticizing her relationship with Gwen, even though they don't know each other. She does really place her own worth in the ability to use that hand as far as getting a new upgrade goes. She would feel completely useless. This also would have been a really good learning moment for her, which is why I think really she is the only character that could have carried this theme, is because she had to learn that she also is more than her parts, and it's not just about what she can do with her hand, it's who she is as a person, and that she still retains that humanity. If you ask my opinion, she should have lost the ability to use that hand altogether, especially at the end fight, so she would have to draw out something within her to fight for the ones that she loves. And this, again, would have kind of sent home that theme that she learned that she is more than her parts, and she doesn't necessarily need that cyborg hand, even though what she does is important to her. She learns that there are other factors in life, there are other things in life to fight for, and there are other important aspects of life that she can draw from within to fight for, and that's where the humanity comes out. It's Aurora's theme, it belongs to her. Get what the book is trying to do, but it just doesn't use it, so we don't get that. In fact, I can't recall a single instance that Aurora even really used her hand, aside from getting that upgrade she claimed she needed, and it being destroyed because Abercan hurt her, and her risking getting it wet. Those are the only 3 instances I can even recall her using it. Now, everyone else in this book is, again, used as tools. They're just used for their parts, right? Like, that's the only thing that's important to them. Their contracts are terminated, they're not going to be able to find work, they're all struggling, right? This theme could have fought for that family theme in that we're not all struggling, we're all there for each other. Even the ones that have had their cyborg parts removed are not any less human. They still have their humanity, they can still be useful, and they can still help fight. Like, that's really the meat of the story and what it should have been. These 2 layers really could have complemented each other, but instead they just don't do anything. One is over here, one is over here, and they don't really contribute anything to the plot. Forgiveness theme, layer 3, that trust thing I was talking about. Everyone betrays everyone in this book. As I said before, I think Gwen and Bastion both could have helped promote this theme of trust and learning to trust again, and this really belongs to them, especially Gwen, because as I said before, her background and what could have been if the context had been given in the story. Learning to trust people again. Even if you can't trust other people, learning to trust in yourself. Learning to believe in your own abilities, because she's struggling all throughout this book, believing that she can't do it, believing that she's screwing up. I think those aspects are very, very important to keep, and they should have been more emphasized. On top of that, learning that she can improve, learning that she can get better, learning that she is useful even without the eye, or maybe she uses that eye. Learning to be useful, learning to trust other people again. In so doing, she also learns to trust herself. She gets better at what she does, and she learns to lend a hand, because even if other people betray her, she knows that she will be okay because she's there for herself. Overcomer theme, layer 4, when the hero is the underdog, but not really. Who doesn't love a good underdog? Even though it's kind of cliche at this point. Maybe this isn't really a theme so much as a cliche, although it literally is every character in this novel. It's all about overcoming the odds, and it's a David and Goliath story, which honestly, no, there's not really much to talk about. I think it just kind of speaks for itself. Identity politics theme, layer 5. because that's what this novel is really about. I was going to call this layer the love comes in all forms, but since this novel literally condemns every form except those of nonconformist, I think it's fitting. This is really what I feel like the book is supposed to be about. Aside from condemning everything that's cis, straight, or white, this theme also seems to condemn every other character who is not a cyborg. From the Emperor on high to the little boy that Gwen tries to convince they're not monsters. Even the useless employees carrying their bags. There's not really any regard to the people that have had their cyborg parts removed or used to be cyborgs, they're just kind of disposed of. The human people who sit in judgment and contempt. They're the real enemy, the paying customers of the cyborg circus. Society is the real antagonist of the novel, condemning these poor suckers for, say it with me, choosing to be cyborgs. Now, how are you going to back up your own voice's claim if the argument for the main theme of your novel contradicts the whole claim that the LGBTQ+ community has been fighting for this whole time? None of these people were born with a robot arm or an eye or cyborg part attached. Maybe it was life or death, but it was still a choice. Now, this could be in correlation to those who might be bi. I believe Meg has talked about in some of her videos, and she does claim that this book is an own voices novel, but it still kind of negates the claim that people are born with these preferences, and that it's something in their DNA and not something that can be flipped off as soon as daddy threatens to send them to gay conversion therapy. If this isn't the message that we're going with here, which it kind of feels like it is, then the only real own voices claim of it would be that girls are having sex with other girls and guys are having sex with other guys. It feels shallow. It doesn't really make up a theme. It doesn't really make up a purpose for that own voices, aside from the fact that you just have people in the novel having sex with whoever they want to have sex with. But because everyone in here is actually polyamorous, there's really no emphasis placed on preferences. There's really no emphasis placed on, well, this is their choice and people are looked down on. I mean, even Gwen admits that people have polyamorous marriages. Like, it's kind of like all things go, except if you're a cyborg, you're really looked down on in society. You're really not accepted just because the Emperor passed a law saying that you're not good. And it feels like it's really tying into politics of lately and everything that's kind of come forward. Is this book supposed to be a nature versus nurture discussion? Or is it supposed to be about accepting people that might be different? If it's the latter, you still lost me. Cyborgs were legal for a long time, right? During this legal time, they were able to get the medical attention that they might have needed to replace limbs or parts of their body that might have saved many lives. One of the things that really screwed me up in this book was the timeline. How long have cyborgs been around? We know that they've been around for as long as Celeste has been working on them, which I'm guessing might be 30, maybe 40 years if she's really pushing it up there. So how long does it really take a society to turn against a life-saving invention? Are there just too few cyborgs to convince them otherwise? If that's the case, then why is the Emperor even worried about it at all? Such small numbers wouldn't even get him to consider them being a threat unless he was seeing a positive change in society that favored the cyborgs. But if this is all that happened in the span of decades, that's like introducing a prosthetic and then telling people that they're better off dead or without a limb. Nobody's going to buy that. If it's fear he's trying to stir in their hearts, and this would have been something to nip in the bud fast. Like, while it was in production fast. Maybe it could have been a part of his campaign, unless he wasn't voted in which case he would have had to be on par with the previous emperor who approved the cyborgs. Anyways, who was the previous emperor that he disagreed with? Did this emperor just start a riot and kind of take over? How did he persuade the people that this was for the best for everyone? Fear. That's why he killed so many people to send the message. Where did he get that power in the first place? Wouldn't it make more sense to work with the cyborgs and the scientists and using that technology to advance his own creations and his own armies instead of trying to make them obsolete? He killed Celeste's children, the creator of the cyborgs, who could have helped him in every which way to give him whatever he wanted, even on the sly, just to send a message? What was the message? Why were her children killed? Why wasn't she imprisoned? Why was she set free to continue doing what she wants to do, or did she just escape? Like, all of this context is just missing. Could have taken the children and held them as leverage to get her to do whatever you want. Again, either use that technology or dismantle the technology that she had already been promoting that is now causing a threat to your society, and you're afraid people are going to get the wrong idea. He wastes a valuable resource and dismisses an opportunity for power because he's stupid. These cyborg parts would have been seen as valuable resources that are now interwoven society that you are claiming to be planets wide. Another problem I have with the timeline. You know how long it would take for society to change, to accept something, and then change it back to reject something within a span of 30 to 50 years? They might all be under the same laws and rules, but these things still take time. You still have different areas of the society, different areas of planets and cities and moons and whatnot that are going to be ruled by different people, have different laws and different ways of doing things. And it's not going to be universal no matter how hard you try. This would take like hundreds, if not thousands of years. 10 years is not enough time. It's not enough time to change things on one continent, let alone a solar system or a galaxy. And then you're talking about introducing these life-changing resources to then take them back. If you ask me, the Emperor should have just initiated buybacks, so to speak. Maybe there was a flaw in the system, maybe there was a bug, and he led the people to believe that the cyborg parts were actually more dangerous than they were helpful. Could have promoted his own campaign, kind of convinced society and convinced people he was looking out for them and thinking about their own good, maybe setting up an example. Maybe Gwen was a part of that previous example, and that's why they have history together. Board them for himself. People think he's doing a good thing, and then you have the rejects on the borders that join the cyborg circus of communities that are now looked down on in society because they just don't want to believe what the Emperor has to say. Now you have these cyborgs that are getting together, and they are living proof of what the Emperor is claiming to be dangerous. That would be the real reason for why the Emperor would want them dead or gone or dismantled. That would be the real reason he would try to be using leverage against Celeste, and why Celeste is now making a risky move by trying to stand up for him. But now it's not just, well, you insulted my research and you insulted me. It's for the lives of my children, whether they are still living or dead. I need to fight back. And this is something that actually it's too many events that I feel like it would have been a great revolutionary story for 2, maybe 3 books. I don't see it making 1 book. I think it would have been way too crammed. It's way too much going on already, and I get that jumping off into Bastion's world, as much as I actually would have looked forward to that kind of plot and that kind of timeline, I think this series could have been like multiple books. I think that all of this was just crammed too much into one, and there wasn't really a lot of thought put into the context of how things function and how things work and how those things then affect the characters, affect the world, affect society. It was just kind of play it by ear. That's how it feels like it was written. There's just so much potential that was wasted because we didn't get the context, because the pacing was all over the place, and because the story did not realize its own purpose. The book didn't realize what it was really about. It just tried to force all of these things in to be something that it's not. And I think that was its biggest flaw. Politics are generally avoided when it comes to writing because people do relate them to the real world, when in reality it's not what that is. It seems to be made to be more about whose team you're on rather than what's actually going on behind the scenes and how things function. But novels typically should be more than just a group of teenagers going up against an authoritarian regime. It is a psychology that dives into why the society in your world functions the way that it does. You don't have to be the super nitpicky kind that needs to really dive into every single detail of this type of psychology and politics, although I do think that's kind of what sets sci-fi apart as far as adult fiction goes. It tends to be a lot more dry because it's heavily detailed, heavily researched, and it does tend to get into the nitty-gritty of this type of information. But I feel like the only real motive that we're given in Cyborg Tinkerer is that it's just out of fear, but we're not really given an explanation as to why this fear itself keeps people in place when you have someone who's already struggling to control several planets and moons in the Union. You know, especially when you have the Emperor kind of like killing people off just to send a message. So what's really keeping the people in the higher ups with all those connections from creating, say, a coup? What really keeps the Emperor in power? What really gives him that kind of control? Because if you're going to tell me fear, I'm not going to buy it. Where does that fear actually stem from? Any idiot could tell a guard to kill anybody. It's not enough to go off of. Now, you could be thinking about Game of Thrones, you could be thinking of maybe Star Wars, where you do have characters that are kind of given that power and they're kind of given that control, but you tend to forget that that control is backed up by something else. The kid in Game of Thrones is probably one of the best examples, because I know he's definitely one of the more nefarious characters that was probably ever written in literary and cinematic history. Everyone loathes him, but I don't think that people realize that his power just isn't because he's just listed as king or because he's sitting on a throne. It's because of the backed up generations and his parents and all of these people that he has backing up his power is the real army behind what's going on. Star Wars, you have the Empire. That's this huge army that I guess you could assume just they're powerful, but it's also like not a lot of people are attuned to the Force that's in Star Wars. Meg's probably gonna kill me for comparing her book to the better works that were written by men. I'm sorry, it the two examples that come to mind. I'm sorry. As far as Star Wars goes, there has always been this divide with the Force. It's not so much they have control over everything so much as, well, they have the upper hand right now. And then we're challenging that upper hand, so both maintain control because both have resources that are not common for the common man. And that's what sets them apart from the rest, and then it just creates this hierarchy. What is really keeping the Emperor in line? Who's really letting him get away with all of these decisions? And if he's stupid, you still can't use that as an excuse, because there are characters that are made to be stupid and selfish and absolutely horrific and doing horrific things that they get away with, but the reason they get away with it is because no one's challenging them, because they have something to back up. Now you could say, well, he has an army. Who's keeping the army in line? Are they also brainwashed super soldiers? This is not necessarily something that the reader has to have every detail on, unless you're writing a sci-fi novel. Focusing more so on the fantasy side, you do not have to give every single detail to your reader. You yourself, as the writer, if you're writing a book like this, need to have the basic understanding of the why things are happening, why people are in power, why people are going along with it. Because if you are writing for an adult audience, that adult audience is going to be smart enough to start asking these questions. They're the ones smart enough to put two and two together. They're the ones that are going to be a more challenging audience. Kids usually just read what they want to read, and that's why the YA stigma exists, is because it's meant to be loose and it's meant to be easy reading, easy to digest, and you don't have to think too much about it. If I'm being honest, I don't think that the writing in the story is too far gone to not have a turnaround. If Meg were to make a sequel, I would say this book should have been it. The sequel that she was talking about, or the sequel that was at least set up at the end of the book, of going off to Bastion's world and Bastion's family, that's actually something I would have looked forward to. I would have really looked forward to that kind of world, but then also, like, I could kind of see in advance the kind of world building problems it would have. I think that kind of book would have had to focus more so on the relationship between the three characters, make that the subplot. This whole relationship is new to them. It's being taken out for a test drive, and that main plot is going to be the test drive. And if you ask my opinion, the main plot shouldn't be, well, they get to his world and then they're like, well, now what? They either have a plan or they get there and something helps him realize that things aren't the way that he left them and some changes need to be taken place. And it's kind of their journey to figure out what those changes are, how they can fix it or how they can change it. And again, like, their relationship has to be tied to the plot. So the actions of the plot and the things happening in the plot are what needs to affect the relationship. It's not the relationship affecting the plot. You can have the relationship create some drama that then stalls the plot, but it shouldn't be what drives it. I think Gwen being crass definitely should be left alone. Just maybe improve the writing a little bit and not make her so cringy and obnoxious. I think Rora needs to grow a pair or emphasize her clinginess and neediness as her own flaw to work on in the novel. Again, she should be what's testing Gwen and Bastion's newfound trust issues that they just resolved. If you ask me, I think that author-tubers on here set themselves up to be professionals. I've said it before. I've said it several times. I know. I'm sounding redundant at this point, but it's the truth. I don't think we need to set ourselves up as professionals. I don't think we should be setting ourselves up as teachers and professionals that know what we're talking about, because I think it's really affecting our reputation and it's affecting the writing's reputation when we finally release it. People start poking holes. They're smart. People in your audience know what they're looking for. And I do understand that a lot of writers, even if you have one or two or even 3 editors for a novel and you yourself have received experience from the industry as a whole, I understand that things are going to get missed. I understand that things are not going to be perfect, even though you might try your damnedest to make it so. But setting up this reputation that is honestly, I feel like, tied to that perfectionism that a lot of us writers kind of fall into, and it becomes the brand, and it becomes the basis for marketing our story. You get a lot of people that look up to you, you get a lot of sales, but then you don't really get those same sales for your next few books. And so we have author tubers that try switching it up, they try switching genres, they decide that they can't do it anymore because they got too much heat the first time, so they continue to do collab videos with other writers to try to continue to gain success through their reputation while they lick their wounds, so to speak, and work on the next thing that they're going to release. Writing advice, like another author tuber that the main point of this video is not that the book sucks. The main point of this video is not that author tubers suck. It's that we are setting up this expectation for our viewers and for our readers, and we are also setting up this expectation when we do it in mass for the whole community and for everyone that wants to be associated with the community, that we are professionals, that we are experienced, that we have knowledge and we have the tools and we know what we're talking about. A lot of these books that I read, it doesn't feel like it's really about the writing, and I don't think that that means that the writer didn't enjoy it. I don't know that they're taking it seriously enough, or maybe they just don't have enough faith in themselves because they don't have that experience, and then all of everything that they've been working for and building up to is destroyed as soon as the internet gets on here and criticizes everything that they have been working for, and that's a huge hit. Like, that shit hurts. Like, I get it, but I don't think continuing with the facade is really the way to go. I think too many people on here want to be influencers. We want to be something that people can look up to, and it doesn't become about the book anymore. It becomes about us. We become the brand. We become the product for marketing, and the book is just the gimmick. I don't think that giving advice and being a teacher on here is a bad thing. I don't think that people who live the writing lifestyle and make videos like Kate Kavanaugh are a bad thing. And I don't think that those things are outdated or that they need to go extinct. Because at one point, I could relate to these people. At one point, I really enjoyed their videos, and I felt like their videos spoke to me. But now I feel like I've outgrown it. This was a huge undertaking. I don't think I'm going to have a big project like this again until I decide to read Be the Savior's Champion, just because I wanted to do that series as a whole. This book actually could have been really good. It could have been really interesting, and I feel sad that it was kind of lost in all of this nonsense that seemed like it was more so for a distraction because the whole goal was just to keep the reader's attention with all these flashy gimmicks. Just not for me. But some people like it, so anyway, that's my video. Hit the thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're willing to wait for more. Comment down below and let me know what you thought of the Cyborg Tinkerer and the author community and where it's headed generally. And I hope to see you guys in my next video.
The demons you forgot about, in the blind spot sitting in the bed. Now I'm making up beat, invisible to me, yeah. Corrupted souls don't know, got black moon behind the drywall. Couldn't even see, even when you bleed. So now you can feel